For years, debate has raged about the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and its potential usefulness in a future war between Russia and NATO. Some argue that the exclave is dangerous because it lies between Poland and the Baltic states. Others claim that NATO could take Kaliningrad in a heartbeat, rendering it obsolete in a future conflict. Vladimir Putin wants to settle that debate, and he's trying to do it by sending something shocking into the exclave. Ukraine's deep intel has exposed a sinister Russian plan for Kaliningrad that could turn the region into a major threat against almost all of Europe if Russia and NATO ever end up at war. On December 18th, United 24 media revealed that a massive leak of Russian documents conducted by Ukrainian intelligence has revealed that Moscow is building new Iskander 1000 ballistic missiles at a shocking rate. These missiles, which as the name implies have a range of 1,000 kilometers or 621 miles, are dangerous because Russia can place them in the Kaliningrad exclave. There, they'll be able to target a host of major European cities, including the likes of Oslo and Hamburg. Makes Kaliningrad a major threat to any plans that NATO may have for containing Russia during the early days of the war. Specifically, the leaked documents reveal that a modernized version of the Iskander missile, which is referred to inside Russia as 9M7232, has left its experimental phase and has now entered serial production. And this isn't a vague theory. Ukraine's deep intel operation has unveiled the proof that this new version of the Iskander is in production, and United 24 media has images of the leaked documents that serve as evidence. Two of these documents are financial records related to the missile, both of which show that Russia is buying large numbers of the components needed to build them. The 9M7232 is mentioned by name, with the documents also stating that the components being purchased will only be used for the missile's production cycle. Another leaked document also offers information on the autonomous inertial guidance system used in the new Iskander 1000. Again with a focus on manufacturing rather than testing. So the missile is being built, as is the guidance system. The Iskander 1000 is no longer a theoretical weapon. Russia believes that it is ready, and the leaked intel shows that it's moved the new missile into serial production. Worst of all, these documents also reveal that many of the components that Russia needs to build its new missile aren't being made inside Russia or by one of the country's allies. They're being built by Western countries, suggesting that sanctions aren't doing enough to stop Russia from mass-producing weapons that could hurt Europe, never mind Ukraine. But we'll come back to that point in a few moments. First, let's focus on the Iskander 1000 itself. Russia has been building Iskander missiles for years, and the weapon is already regarded as one of the most worrying missile threats that the country presents to Europe. However, the Iskander 1000 is a different kettle of fish, as it's an upgraded version of an already dangerous weapon that could cause severe issues for NATO. The first rumblings about Russia's attempts to upgrade the Iskander seemed to arise back in January 2025, which is when the Indian outlet Raksha Aniveda reported on the Russian projections for its new weapon. It repeated the claim that the Iskander 1000 will have the 1,000-kilometer range that the name suggests, though it also revealed that Russia believed its new missile might even be able to travel as far as 1,300 kilometers, or 807 miles. Even at the lower end of the spectrum, this would mean that the Iskander 1000 could fly for around double the distance of the already terrifying Iskander M. Apparently, this increased range is the result of improvements that Russia has made in the propulsion technology used to drive the missile, which includes a fuel capacity increase of up to 15% and a new engine. The guidance system mentioned in the leaked documents was also touched on during this early analysis of Russia's Iskander 1000 projection, with that system supposedly making the missile accurate to within 5 meters, or about 16.4 feet of its target. When it comes to warheads, Raksha Aniveda reports that Russia's new Iskander missile can carry either cluster munitions or high-explosive fragmentation warheads, weighing up to around 350 kilograms or 771 pounds. Other reports, however, suggest that the missile's warhead capacity could be far greater, with some estimates placing it as high as 700 kilograms or roughly 1,543 pounds. The missile would be fast, too. Fast enough to hit speeds up to 3,100 meters per second, which amounts to around Mach 9, making the Iskander 1000 a hypersonic missile against which NATO would struggle to defend. Fast forward to December, and United 24 media shares comparatively fewer details about Russia's new missile. It mentioned that the original Iskander can fly at speeds of up to 2,600 meters per second, or Mach 7.5, which may be a baseline speed for the Iskander 1000 based on Raksha Aniveda's claims. However, the outlet adds that the most worrying thing about Russia's new missile is that it's incredibly difficult to distinguish an Iskander 1000 from the previous Iskander models. What is concerning is that so far it's been difficult to distinguish between the different models from surveillance, as indicated in some open source information from Russian sources, the outlet claims. NATO will be especially worried about that problem. A failure to determine which type of Iskander Russia has launched could lead to delays in preparing appropriate air defenses. By the time those defenses are ready, assuming they can be readied at all, Russia's new missile may have already struck its target. Russian open sources have highlighted the problem that NATO will face, adding that the group's members will need to respond to every Iskander launch throughout the entire operational rear. Not only does that type of response waste resources, but Russia can also use it to identify aircraft and defenses that NATO might use against an Iskander 1000. The idea is simple. Launch an original Iskander, use the NATO response to see where the defenses are for the Iskander 1000, then use the new missile to either circumvent those regions or strike them directly. Then there's the Kaliningrad problem to consider. Military Watch magazine was another outlet that reported on the initial claims about the Iskander 1000's capabilities back in January. In addition to confirming many of the details shared by Raksha and Iveda, the outlet revealed that the first indications that the missile was under development came in May 2024, on the 78th anniversary of Russia's Kapustin Yar missile test site. Though little was known about the missile back then, Military Watch magazine says that Russian sources speculated that Putin's intention was to station as many of these powerful ballistic missiles as it could inside Kaliningrad. The documents leaked by Ukraine's intelligence don't confirm this. However, United 24 media also speculates that Kaliningrad is the intended destination for many of Russia's new missiles. That's a major problem for NATO for a simple reason. Some of the collective defense organization's major cities will be in range of the Iskander 1000 if it's stationed in the Russian exclave. We've already mentioned the likes of Oslo and Hamburg, the former of which seems to be under threat regardless of whether Russia deploys Iskander 1000s in Kaliningrad or the Russian mainland. But there is a massive list of potential targets that could fall inside the new missile's range, which is precisely why speculation is so rife that Kaliningrad is the intended destination. Assuming United 24 media is right about where the Iskander 1000 is going, all of Poland is at immediate risk. The new missiles would also be able to hit most of Germany, along with southern Norway and Sweden. Denmark's shipping straits would be under threat, as would the nation's capital, Copenhagen. And the list goes on. Russia could hit all three of the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia with Iskander 1000s stationed in Kaliningrad. Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and parts of the Netherlands could also become targets, as could Moldova and Romania. Some of these nations, such as Poland and the Baltic states, were under threat from the earlier version of the Iskander. But now that Russia appears to have moved its upgraded version of the missile into production, Kaliningrad could become ground zero for a Russian assault against almost all of Central and Eastern Europe. In other words, the entire flank on which NATO would rely to fend off the initial stages of a Russian invasion of Europe. And of course, Ukraine, which has already felt plenty of the power of the earlier versions of the Iskander, would also be a key target. While NATO's members will already be concerned about the potential for devastation that Russia's new Kaliningrad missile plan brings with it, they'll be livid about something that we mentioned earlier in the video. The leaked documents have revealed that Russia is heavily reliant on components that it's purchasing from Western companies to build these missiles, and it's apparently able to buy those components with minimal effort. The question has to be asked, weren't sanctions supposed to prevent situations precisely like this from arising? They were, but then the issue of Western parts finding their way into Russian weapons is far from new. In fact, it's a problem that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has raised as recently as October of this year. In a statement published on the president's website, it was revealed that Russia launched a combined strike against Ukraine on the night of October 5th that saw it deploy 549 missiles and drones. That alone isn't remarkable, sadly, as Russia has been intensifying these types of combined strikes during 2025. What is remarkable is that these missiles and drones contained more than 100,000 foreign-made components, which highlights how poor a job sanctions have done at stopping Russia from building weapons. Some of these components come from the types of countries that you would expect, such as China. However, many come from nations that have sanctions in place against Russia. Zelensky's website rattled off several of those countries, including the US, UK, the Netherlands, Japan, Germany, Sweden, and South Korea, all of which have provided parts that are being used in Russia's missiles and drones. Zelensky is understandably upset about this issue, stating in October, "Every Russian missile and every Russian attack drone also contains parts that are still being supplied to Russia from Western countries and various countries close to Russia. Now in the fourth year of the full-scale war, it's simply strange to hear anyone claim that they don't know how to stop the flow of critical components." Ukraine's president has a point, though it doesn't appear to be one that the Western companies still selling these components to Russia are taking to heart. Sanctions simply aren't doing enough to prevent Russia from building weapons like the Iskander 1000, even when companies that are actively being sanctioned are involved in the manufacturing process. HUR, which is the Ukrainian intelligence service responsible for leaking the Russian documents, explained the scale of the problem. The main executor of state contracts for the development and production of 9M723 missiles is the Russian Engineering Design Bureau, HUR said, before adding, "The production of the missiles is carried out at the facilities of the Votkino plant. Both enterprises have long been under sanctions by most countries of the Sanctions coalition, as have most other manufacturers of components for the ballistic Iskander. Sanctions aren't doing enough to stop these plants." But it gets worse. Many of the companies that are involved in the production of the Iskander 1000 aren't even sanctioned. HUR has identified 49 businesses that are involved in the building of the missile, and 13 of those 49 aren't sanctioned by any of Ukraine's allies. Among them is the Morozov plant in Russia, which builds the solid propellant charges used in all of Russia's Iskander missiles. The manufacturer of the accelerometers used for the Iskander's platform-free inertial navigation system has also escaped sanctions up to this point. So too have PSB Technologies and Pantes, which both make board kits that Russia is installing in Iskander missiles. There are more, but you get the point. The Iskander 1000 that now threatens much of Europe, especially if it's to be deployed in Kaliningrad, may have only been made possible because of the West's sanctions failures. Manufacturers involved in the missile's production are either not sanctioned at all, or when they are, the sanctions aren't being implemented well enough to stop them from doing what Putin needs them to do. This tells us one very important thing. A lot more needs to be done on the sanctions front to stop Russia from building more Iskander 1000s. Zelensky has been saying this for a long time. Back in August, in the wake of another Russian airstrike that included 540 drones, 8 ballistic missiles, and 37 other types of missiles, Zelensky said new sanctions were needed. The only way to reopen a window of opportunity for diplomacy is through tough measures against all those bankrolling the Russian army and effective sanctions against Moscow itself, banking and energy sanctions, Ukraine's president declared after the strike. Though this specific call was for sanctions against Russia's financial power, Zelensky's sentiments carried over to any organization that is involved in helping Putin maintain his supposed special military operation. Ukraine's president made another call for more pressure to be placed on Russia around December 21st. That's when The Hindu reported that Zelensky believes that the US in particular must do more to place pressure on Putin, likely with more sanctions, due to the failure of Russia's leader to seek a diplomatic end of the war that he started. Again and again, the message is being sent as diplomatically as Zelensky can manage. Existing sanctions aren't doing enough, both in terms of scope and execution, to stop Russia from doing what it wants to do. And when Western companies are still willing to sell the components that Russia needs to build new missiles like the Iskander 1000, it's tough to argue against Ukraine's position. Europe needs to do more about these kinds of sanctions issues too. That's according to Olena Yurchenko, who is the Director of Analysis, Investigations and Research at the Economic Security Council of Ukraine. Yurchenko pulls no punches when it comes to the European Union, or EU, stating, "First, the EU should increase the scope of sanctioning companies involved in circumventing sanctions on specific goods and services. Currently, the pace is slow and the number is small, around 5 to 7 companies per package on average, while there are thousands of circumventing companies." That's a good point. The EU sanction packages aren't far-reaching enough to stop Iskander 1000 production, which is a clear problem. And though the EU continues to extend the sanctions that it has implemented on December 22nd, when it announced a 6-month extension to the economic sanctions against Russia, more needs to be done. Execution is lacking as much as scope, as The Guardian revealed in a December 21st article. It noted that Russia's use of its Shadow Fleet vessels, which has been using to skirt sanctions since the war began, has expanded in both scale and scope. Military efforts to stop these shady ships create the risk of confrontation with Russia, but if nothing is done to stop them, those ships will keep on being able to transport cargo, which may include Western components. Those components don't even have to come from the countries that made them. Russia can use intermediaries to buy them on its behalf and then purchase them, albeit at marked up prices, to get what it needs. United 24 Media suggests that mandatory compliance checks on all products that could have any sort of military or otherwise beneficial use to Russia are needed to ensure the enforcement of existing sanctions. However, that still doesn't solve the problem of more than a quarter of the companies involved in the Iskander 1000 not being sanctioned at all. This is a double-barreled problem. For every sanction that the West creates, Putin appears to be capable of finding a workaround. The Iskander 1000 is one of the many products of the failure of sanctions to stop Russia's leader from waging his war against Ukraine. Now, that failure is coming back to haunt the rest of Europe as Russia seemingly prepares to build the Iskander 1000 missiles en masse to deploy in Kaliningrad. And it's not just Kaliningrad that could become a problem. The emergence of these missiles gives Putin another card to play in peace negotiations. Plus, there's plenty of potential for Russia to start supplying these missiles to its allies, such as Belarus, North Korea, and Iran, which would then turn a European problem into a global issue. Belarus's dictator president Alexander Lukashenko is already claiming that another Russian missile, the Oreshnik, has been deployed in his nation. It's not too much of a stretch to assume that the Iskander 1000 may soon follow. As for Kaliningrad, NATO, and Europe especially, now have a major problem that needs to be managed. Assuming the Iskander 1000 does end up in Kaliningrad, Putin will have transformed a potentially vulnerable exclave into a major threat. Kaliningrad was already in that position, as the US Naval Institute points out. It says that Russia could create a land bridge between Belarus and Kaliningrad via the Suwalki Gap, which might cut the Baltic states off from their NATO allies. With Iskander 1000s pelting the troops attempting to reach the gap as Russia occupies it, there's a possibility that the Baltic states could fall quickly enough for NATO to lose the first line of its defense in the event of a war against Russia. NATO apparently has a plan to quickly neutralize the Russian exclave, per the commander of the US forces in Europe, General Christopher Donahue. In July, Militani reported that the general has claimed the rapid destruction of Kaliningrad is part of NATO's overall Eastern European strategy, and that it will be aided by the standardization of systems and coordinated solutions that are based on cloud technologies. But will whatever this plan entails still work if Iskander 1000s are in play? It's hard to say, as Donahue didn't detail the plan, only stating that it exists. As for Putin, he has increased his rhetoric around Kaliningrad, which suggests that he may be planning to use the exclave for nefarious purposes. In November, Russia began accusing NATO of conducting training operations that suggest that it's considering forming a blockade around Kaliningrad. And in December, Putin issued a direct threat related to these blockade accusations when he held his annual Q&A sessions. Asked about the prospect of an attack on Kaliningrad, Russia's president said, "I hope that doesn't happen. If threats of this kind are created against us, we will destroy these threats. And everyone must understand this and be aware that actions of this kind will simply lead to an escalation of the conflict unseen until now." Is that an empty threat? Perhaps. Or maybe it's Putin's way of trying to get NATO to switch its focus away from Kaliningrad, which would leave the path open for Russia to move its newly produced Iskander 1000s into the exclave. NATO now has to figure out how to manage this emerging situation, and it has to do it soon, as Russia's new missile places far too much of Europe under threat. Doomsayers might even use the emergence of the Iskander 1000 to support their claims that World War III is on the horizon. The worrying thing is, they may be right. To find out why, check out our video, where we examine the reasons why some experts believe that the world is on the brink of a new global war. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Russia's latest attempts to use Kaliningrad as a threat against NATO and Europe. And thank you for watching.